Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Hello, dear friends. Today I want to talk on the topic of unmasking the Board of Peace. But I come to this podcast recording today in quite an emotional state as I'm looking at all the things that are happening in the world today, especially in Iran, Lebanon, Palestine, all the things that are happening in the world today are disturbing me. I'm going to start with Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, which he wrote in the aftermath of the First World War. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. And skipping along a little bit to the end, the darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. I do love the poetry of Yeats. In fact, I did have the opportunity, as a full moon was rising, to visit Yeats' grave and there to offer prayers for the empowerment of my own poetry writing. What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. Although written in 1919, this poem could also have been written today. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The little girls of Minab. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. 20,000 children of Gaza. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. It goes on and on. Surely the second coming is at hand. My friends, there are more Christian Zionists, twice as many Christian Zionists in the United States of America as there are Jews in the entire world. And these Christian Zionists want to bring Armageddon because they believe it will bring about the second coming, when they, the true believers, will be snatched up in the rapture. Planes will fall out of the sky because the pilot was snatched up. Surgeons will vanish in the middle of an operation because they were believers. They were saved. And the rest of us, we will live through Armageddon, and we will live through the era of the Antichrist. and the people who are apocalypse active are actively working to foment the wars that will bring this time on. So here we are. Let's go to Orwell. The Ministry of Peace concerns itself with war. The Ministry of Truth with lies. The Ministry of Love with torture. And the Ministry of Plenty with starvation. These contradictions are not accidental, nor do they result from ordinary hypocrisy. They are deliberate exercises in doublethink. And yes, my dear friends, the Board of Peace concerns itself with imperialism and global domination. It concerns itself with imperialism and global domination. Let's move on to a quote from the Middle East Monitor, and we'll chew this quote over. So, the Board of Peace started on 17th of November 2025, when the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 2803, known as Board of Peace, and that to create an international stabilization force for the Gaza Strip. But UN experts see it as a violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the inalienable rights of Palestinians, especially their right of self-determination. The resolution in its preamble welcomes the constructive role that the US and other countries played in facilitating the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. While the US administration remains complicit in the genocide by shielding Israel from any UN Security Council resolution through its veto power, sanctioning the International Criminal Court, and providing massive, continuous military aid to Israel. Is it important? Is the UN important? Is the UN Security Council important? Is the UN Charter important? I was born in December of 1951, and my parents brought me into a world where young, idealistic people like them, young, idealistic intellectuals like them, wanted to see a world of peace, a world where wars could no longer happen and rage throughout the world. My parents lost their teen years to the war. My mother, as an evacuee, did not see her parents from the age of 14 to the age of 17, when she completed school and came back to London during the mini blitz to join Chelsea Polytechnic, where she met my dad, who had spent the entire war in London working as a fire warden as a teenager, because there was no Jewish home for him to be evacuated to. And my grandparents weren't happy when he went to a Catholic home, and wrote home and said, "May I have a rosary? Because I want to fit in. And they have family prayers here with a rosary." He was brought right back home. Good Jewish boys do not have rosaries. My parents and most of the world at that time wanted to bring hope out of despair, wanted to bring peace out of the rubble of war, wanted that what had just happened, the 2 world wars that had consumed everything in this horrendous conflagration, could never happen again. And so it came about that in 1945, the UN Charter was signed by the original 50 nations, and so it came about that in 1948 the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed, and the world embarked on an era where these horrors could not happen. That was the vision. That was the hope. That was the dream. My parents wanted to raise children who would stand for that dream, who would stand for that vision, and who would say no to the next Hitler. So here we are, and this is what we're doing today, in a small way. The constructive role that the US played in Gaza. Are you kidding me? It's just an exercise in doublethink. Democracy Without Borders comments on the Board of Peace that according to its charter, it is set up as a permanent organization to undertake peace-building functions in areas affected or threatened by conflict. The Charter grants extraordinary authority to a single individual, the inaugural chairman, named as Donald Trump personally, who controls membership, the executive board and its composition, decision-making, institutional structure, and the interpretation of the Charter, among other things. As Democracy Without Borders says, the Board of Peace represents an unacceptable and regressive shift towards centralized power and blurs the line between public and private affairs. And in case you were wondering, it is not, they say, a viable model for international organization. Now, I am not an expert in the UN or international law, but I have been on many boards of many nonprofits and NGOs, and I know the importance of SOP or Standard Operating Procedure, and I know that nothing about this is Standard Operating Procedure, that you cannot name an individual personally to control something. That is not Standard Operating Procedure. None of this is Standard Operating Procedure for any kind of organization. And the function of Standard Operating Procedure is to have things take place in a proper manner. And no, I'm sorry, but no nonprofit would be allowed to do this stuff and be a nonprofit. Democracy International, they're in Cologne, says the Board of Peace embodies the purely transactional worldview of Trump. Just what I'm saying. Trump sees no SOP. It's all just transactional. Power is concentrated in the hands of a single individual, and global decision-making is reduced to a privilege for those with the deepest pockets. And this looks like, they say, a hostile takeover of global governance. That's why I made this podcast. I want us to understand that this is not just a silly thing, a ridiculous thing, an annoying thing, an upsetting thing. This is a catastrophe in the making, a hostile takeover of global governance. Exactly what the hopeful young people in 1945 did not want to see. That is exactly what could happen if we don't stand up against the Board of Peace. Of course, the Board of Peace is quite a joke, seeing how many of the members of the Board of Peace are either actually wanted for war crimes or are well-known murderous dictators with blood-soaked hands. Are well-known murderous dictators, their hands soaked in blood, even the blood of their own citizens. Oh my God. These people are going to run the world. There's a very important principle in the UN Charter, and that is the equality of nations. It is the principle whereby Vanuatu is equally as important as the United States of America. The equality of nations. Here's some of the ways that that's being violated. First, pay to participate. You pay $1 billion for a permanent seat. I mean, are small island nations able to do that? Are small Caribbean countries able to do that? This doesn't make sense. It is tying all of the influence and all of the decision-making power for our world, if this really goes ahead, to financial contribution. And then, again, the centralized power of Donald Trump obviously violates the principle of equality of nations. And it's not just about Trump being the president of the United States. It's for his whole life. Well, okay, he's an old man. For his whole life, probably not going to be a really long time. I'm younger than him, and I'm on the countdown of under 20 years of walking this earth in this body. He's older, and he's not exactly following an Ayurvedic diet or lifestyle either, is he? But he can appoint his own successor. He sets the entire agenda. As we mentioned before, he gets to interpret the charter. It can say, he can play Humpty Dumpty with his own charter. Words mean what I say they mean. Whereas UNGA, the UN General Assembly, it's consensus, and there is one vote for one nation, even if it is a tiny Pacific island nation or a tiny Caribbean island nation. They all have a vote. Multilateralism. It's a parallel structure that is designed to replace the UN. It will weaken international laws. It will weaken all the institutions that are here to protect us. Also, we have a Board of Peace that's supposed to be sorting stuff out in Gaza. And where are the Palestinians? And where is the basic human principle of nothing about us without us? And as I mentioned, it's a club of war criminals and blood-soaked dictators. Although the Board of Peace was initially, when it was set up and when it was approved by, I still can't believe this, by the UN Security Council, it's now going to mediate all the other global conflicts. So we are back to Pax Romana, that kind of peace. we are back to that kind of peace. But there's more. On a financial level, and here within US law, and I'm quoting from Dave Troy, who's an investigative reporter that I follow on Twitter or X. The Board of Peace doesn't exist as a legal entity. It's not organized under the laws of any country. And as Dave Troy points out, that means it is completely above the law. SOP, anyone? Trump were like, oh, we're going to give $10 billion. Wait a moment. Congress has not approved the Board of Peace, and Congress, by the way, controls the purse strings. There has been no vote for the US to join the Board of Peace. So are we a democracy? Or are we a has-been, once upon a time democracy? So Dave Troy points out and calls our attention to the fact that the Board of Peace is collecting and distributing funds with J.P. Morgan as banker. But he says this must be in violation of Know Your Customer laws because the Board of Peace does not exist. And Dave Troy describes it as a transnational mafia, backed only by the executive power of its members. And when I think about it being a transnational mafia, it also cycles all of this back around to the Epstein files. Because the Epstein files kind of shows us how the whole world is being run by a mafia of billionaires who hate and abuse women and children and traffic them and joke about it. Sometimes I have even wondered if Epstein really is the spider in the middle of the web, or if he is just a window onto something very much larger. But it has been stated by UN bodies that the trafficking and murdering and abusing of women that we get a window onto in the Epstein files shows us large, vast, terrifying crimes against humanity. And I feel there are so many tie-ins between the people, the countries or their leaders that have joined the Board of Peace, and the people in the Epstein files. And then, of course, I'm also always alert to the multi-layers of distraction from the Epstein files. Let's do Venezuela. Let's starve the people of Cuba and force their healthcare system to collapse. Hey, why don't we start bombing Iran, which will completely fill the airwaves, and you won't notice what's going on in Gaza, and you will definitely forget all about the Epstein files because you'll be so upset about all the graves of lovely little girls, and you won't think about the other lovely little girls anymore, the ones that were trafficked by Epstein. But we want to think of all the little girls. And we don't want to let ourselves be distracted from this billionaire and tyrant rule that we are heading into. So Dave Troy goes on to point out that since the Board of Peace actually it's not an entity, it's not incorporated. A lot of the ashram is very, very small, but we had to spend a lot of money and go through many months of hoops to actually exist as a real entity and a genuine church. It wasn't easy. To call something something, it has to exist as an entity. So the Board of Peace isn't an entity. That means that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is illegally holding trademarks on its behalf. And there's an act called the Lanham Act, which requires that holders of trademarks are going to use the marks in commerce, and that means the PTO is going to use those marks in commerce. By the way, the marks are horrible, aren't they? They're a real rip-off of the UN logo. There's an executive order that protects the boards of peace under the International Organizations Immunity Act, but it doesn't legitimize. It still does not exist as an organization. And then the scary, scary part that I've been pointing out, that many of the authors that we've looked at have pointed out, and Dave Troy is pointing out, it's supposed to be used to oversee the UN. The UN Charter does not provide for the UN to be overseen. And so Dave Troy says, if this is not stopped, it will quickly evolve into a world takeover mechanism. It's usurping the sovereignty of the US and the sovereignty in Gaza of the Palestinians, and the sovereignty of all the participant countries. So that is actually been pointed out as one way we can attack this Board of Peace is through its illegitimate trademarks or logos. My friends, this is no joke. This is the rough beast slouching toward Bethlehem to be born. This is something that is trying to deal a death blow to that hopeful world that my parents experienced before they had me. A world that was no longer going to have horrific wars. And I know I have seen many times on X/Twitter, I still call it Twitter, people from the global south, etc., saying international humanitarian law is a joke and it's just another way for the big, rich Western nations to impose their will on the rest of the world. And I understand why you would say that, but it's not the case. It's all we have got to stand on. The basis of a world in which you and I and our neighbor next door and our neighbor across the planet cannot legally be enslaved. The reason why it's not legal to bomb hospitals, even though this has happened ever since it started in Syria and nobody said anything, the reason why the world is at least supposed to be a better place is because we have a UN Charter. We have a UN General Assembly with equality of nations, and we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, on which I take my stance. Because, remember, I was born for this. It's what my parents wanted, bringing me into this world. We can't let this go. It's too important. Okay, so we keep letting it slip away, but every time we let it slip, it will slip more. I kept on and on and on saying, if we can bomb hospitals in Syria, no hospital on the planet is safe. And if we can kill doctors in Syria, no healthcare worker on the planet is safe. And I said it till I was blue in the face. And look what's happened. Hospital bombed in Gaza. In Lebanon, I'm not quite sure, but probably in Iran. The healthcare system is being destroyed. The healthcare system is being brought down not by bombs, but by oil starvation. In Cuba, we must arise. I'm going to wrap up with, out of the pain I felt this morning, I wrote a little poem. I'm going to close with this. In Lebanon, Ramadan decorations quiver amid rubble. In Gaza, Iftar is an empty belly. The little girls of Minab will not celebrate Nowruz this year. My heart is breaking. War cannot bring peace. Dear friends, war cannot bring peace. And we, the peoples of the world, we are responsible in the end for the peace of the world. Thanks, everyone. Namaste.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Sugandhim pushtivardanam urvarukamiva bandanam mrityormukshiyam